Returning to the show for the second time, a man of many titles, some of those including researcher, author, and podcaster. Please welcome Tim Swartz to the show. How's it going today?
Hey, it's going great. Thanks for having me back on your show. See, you didn't learn the last time that I was on, and now you have me back again, so you're stuck.
Hey, I don't know about you, man, but last time you were on, it was probably one of my favorite episodes I've ever recorded. We ended up going for almost 3 hours, had a lot of good feedback on it. So you're one of those people. It's always welcome on the show, sir.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much. I did. I had a great time the last time, and so I was really happy that you decided to throw the dice and have me back on again.
Just second of many, of course, because I'm guarantee you there's going to be a lot more in the future. Because we're some of those people that you get us together and we can just keep going and going and going. So
It's true. It's true.
in a
To
good
the
way, of course.
yeah. Hopefully, I mean, hopefully it's not to the point where the audience is like, "Would you just shut up already?" Sure.
I know at least a lot of my audience, they come for the in-depth conversation, which we do have a lot of. So at least as far as my listener base goes, I think that they're going to really enjoy anything that we pretty much do together.
Well, good, good. All right. Well, I don't think that they'll be disappointed tonight then.
So for anybody that wasn't around for the first show or any new listeners, anybody that just didn't happen to hear it, why don't you kind of give them a rough idea about who you are and what you do before we get into some of your new research?
Well, if they didn't listen to it last time, tough. I mean, what? Am I Mr. Exposition here? No, no, that's all right. And you may hear my cat in the background. There's a cat outside my office door that hates hates any closed door. So if you hear a cat meowing occasionally, that's all it is. He just hates being on the other side of a closed door. So. But gosh, I mean, this is one of those things. It's like where do you start with that kind of description? The last time that I was on, I told the story of how, when I was a kid, I wasn't really, unlike probably a lot of your other guests who start out, well, when I was a kid, I was really interested in this. And well, that wasn't like that with me. I grew up in Indiana. So I was interested in, like race cars and basketball and things like that. Now, I was interested in, say, like, science and space. The whole space program was really going hot and heavy then with the Mercury and the Apollos. But when it came to say like the paranormal and UFOs, I really didn't have much interest or cared less until the time I had to give a report about UFOs to my class, and this was assigned by the teacher. She would just, she would assign these things to everybody to do an essay on, and I got to think about flying saucers one time, and so after I was finished, I was then pegged as the flying saucer guy. I was the guy who believed in little green men from Mars and all that other stuff. And it's just like, no, I don't care. Find something else. Let's talk about the Indianapolis 500, not flying saucers. But no, no, no. I was the guy who believed in flying saucers. But what ended up really drawing me in to it all was the people who would come up to me. And when people are in a group, they'll make fun of you and stuff, but then later they'll come up to you by themselves and they'll say, I don't believe in that kind of stuff, but, and then they'd tell me a story about how they while their family was on vacation, they saw, like a UFO, or their great grandmother Matilda keeps showing up at the foot of their bed at night, even though great grandma Matilda died like 2 weeks ago. So it was those kind of stories from people who weren't interested in any kind of publicity or trying to make money or anything like that. No, they had a weird experience, and they and a lot of people don't know how to process that. They we all have like this filing system in our heads where we file away all the little things that we do every day. the normal thing. You know, you get up, you have breakfast, have coffee, drive to work, come home, go to bed, do it all over again. Now, say one day when you're going to work, a UFO lands in front of your car, and you know, little guys come out and collect rocks and plants and things and fly away. Now, for most people, except for maybe the people who like to listen to your show or watch some of these programs on the History Channel, they have no knowledge base, no previous knowledge base to put that kind of experience in their head. So a lot of people, they'll, well, think they're going crazy. You know, I saw a UFO with little gray guys. I must be nuts. There's no other explanation. I'm crazy. They can't tell anybody because they know they'll be made fun of. Especially you can't tell anybody you work with, can't tell your family. Family's terrible. You know, they'll just every Thanksgiving you'll be the butt of the jokes for the next 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So they would come to me because they knew I was interested in this stuff, or at least very early on, they thought I was interested. I really wasn't.
Kind of funny how sometimes you just fall into what you do rather than actually going out and getting it. You're one of those people that just kind of accidentally fell into what you do, but you went with it and it worked for you.
Well, it's true, and it's because of those personal accounts, okay? Because you know we hear these wild stories, and you know most people that's what they think they are, wild stories. Oh, you know, it's just crazy stuff. But I've heard so many of these stories through the years that it's just like, well, there has to be something going on. People just don't, just don't make this stuff up just to come and tell me and then never tell anybody else again.
Especially when there's people that have so many similarities between things and they have no contact with each other or no base of information, like you were saying. They're just explaining something exactly how it happened. And when you start having similarities amongst those types of people, like it brings a lot of questions in.
Well, I mean, and so not only do you have similarities all across the planet, but you have similarities all across time. You know, you have the same kind of stories that people were having these experiences 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. All right. Now, they may be perceived differently due to social and cultural upbringing, but the stories really basically remain the same through all this time. And for most people, they exist in like a vacuum of information when it comes to this kind of stuff. So I mean, they may, people come and tell me these stories and they'll have no idea that I've got a whole file of the very same kind of stories, just from all over the place, and all across the decades. So that's what really got me interested in all this stuff. It's the stories are interesting, and it's the people who bring them to me that I think is the most fascinating, because it really does confirm to me that there is that our reality, our world, our universe is probably a lot different than we think it is. All right. That there is so much more going on than we can perceive, and these little incidents, these little weird things that happen to people on a daily basis all across the planet. It just shows me that just really what a wonderfully mysterious and fascinating place we live in.
I mean, even if you break it down too, you got to think about the numbers here that, there's a pretty good amount of people that end up having this type of contact where they actually come out and talk about it. But then there's a whole backstory of people that have had these experiences and never want to talk about it. Right. And then there's another group of people who have had experiences and they try to rationalize it with things that are like normal happening. So like, they might see like a UFO with somebody walking out of it and they rationalize it as, oh, it must have been like a Halloween prop with some kids walking out, and they never think about it ever again. And then even on another spectrum of things, when you start getting into like the in-depth, like advanced technology where they could potentially like wipe certain parts of your mind or almost like knock you out before they even come, it makes you wonder too, how many people could have had like abduction experiences or things like that they weren't even aware of in the first place. And there's a lot of like regressions that people have where they start kind of getting pieces together of like, some missing time they may have had. But a lot of people, it seems like, that don't dream, there's always some like weird ties when they start really getting into that stuff. So it kind of makes me wonder if these things interact with us way more than we even imagine that they do, and even on another level where it's not even necessarily like physical, but they might even be able to interact with you like consciously, like while you're sleeping, and you may not even be aware of anything going on. And
Mhm.
that may be part of like a social experiment, just to kind of see like about you and like how you react, assumably, because just like, how we watch animals in nature, it's not just about knowing like how the animal functions. You also want to know like how the animal thinks. So, another portion of that is you're going to have to put people into kind of like thought experiments to kind of see how they interact. And you don't really want them to be aware of you. Otherwise, they're going to react different than how they would normally react. It's like that observer effect.
Yes, very. Yeah, that's very much so. And you brought up a good point with people who have had unusual experiences. Some will just be absolutely fascinated by it and try to figure out what was going on. But you have a very large percentage of people who just want to forget about it and will ignore what happened to them. They'll try to shove it into the back of their mind, and it never happened. And it's interesting. You'll see that happen a lot when you have, say, like a group of people have an experience at the same time. That you'll have a certain percentage of this group just absolutely refuse to accept and acknowledge that anything weird happened. And it's like you said, they'll try to rationalize it, sometimes to the extreme that it would make more sense that yeah, you actually did experience, a UFO with little gray guys that came out and stole your cat. Rather than whatever explanation that they came up with. It's kind of like how the Air Force used to try to come up with some of the more bizarre explanations of UFO sightings. Oh, well, swamp gas, or
Hmm.
kids out
Weather balloons.
weather balloons, kids out flying a kite. Oh, you saw the planet Venus. It doesn't matter if it was cloudy. The clouds were above Venus, so it was Venus. So but I mean, I would say that probably all of us, at least one time in our life, have had some kind of really strange experience. Now, it may not, it may not be to the extreme of seeing a ghost come, dancing down your staircase, or something like that. It could be very small, like. Uh, the telephone rings and without even looking at it, who it is that's going to call, or you're thinking about somebody and all of a sudden they'll call you, or you'll hear their name on television, or the thing that I get a lot is I'll be reading a book and people will say the exact same, say, like a set of words that I'm reading. I get
That's
that a
some
lot.
synchronicity. I
Yeah.
was gonna say a lot of the time for me, I'll be like thinking about something, and then it'll pop up somewhere. Not even like any of that weird like algorithm stuff on like Facebook, but like I'll
Mm,
be like watching a movie and thinking about like a certain thing, and then all of a sudden something pertaining to it'll pop up in the movie,
yeah.
or I'll be reading an article, and all of a sudden I'll be like on a thought train, and there'll be something that kind of continues my thought train, like
Mhm.
everything kind of weirdly working out for a reason.
Right. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean, I think that just shows that we're all a lot more connected, not only with each other but with the universe. It's like like a spider's web that connects us with everything, and everything connects us. But so I mean, so when it comes to these weird experiences, you have a group of people, and back to just briefly what you had said earlier, I would say that probably we only get about, probably even less than 1% of all the really truly bizarre experiences that people are happening that people have had happen to them. We get less than 1% where somebody will actually come and try to tell somebody else about it. All right. Everybody else just kind of suffers alone, which is really a shame, because I would love to know what else is going on out there, because this less than 1%, we see some of these, just absolutely amazing and really seemingly connected types of cases. So what else is going on that people are afraid to ever speak about it? John Keel would call, he had a name for people who had close encounter UFO experiences but never told anybody about it. He called them silent contactees. All right. These people never sought any kind of publicity, never told anybody, not even their families, about what was going on in their life. They just kind of suffered alone. And John would just would run across them accidentally, or maybe he would have a friend that a person just had confided in, and that's how he discovered about it. But he discovered that there were a lot of people who had these really, the high strangeness cases of UFO experiences that nobody ever talked about, nobody ever wanted to talk about it. And so I mean, to me, back to when you asked me how I got started in that, that's really the stuff that fascinated me was the human experience in all of these cases. And it continues to fascinate me today, because I love having somebody, like, send me an email and said, you're not going to believe me, but, and,
That's
it's
how you know
just,
it's going to be good.
oh yeah, yeah. It's like, well, give me a shot. I may not. And yeah, there are some times I'll have people tell me stories that I'm pretty certain they're just trying to pull my leg. I've kind of developed, the what the cops would call a blue sense on stories that are probably fabrications. I can't be sure about it. Nobody can, nobody can be sure 100%. But I'm pretty trusting when it comes to a lot of the reports that come to me, because they just have that ring of believability to them.
It's about sometimes how somebody comes about the story too, because if you see somebody that's like very much so into the community, they never really had like their own experience, and they start coming at you with like a fantastical experience, then you maybe kind of hear it out and kind of see where it plays out. But especially when you get people that don't even want their names attached to stuff, then I feel like those are always the ones that I always get the most hooked into, because like they don't want their name linked. And I mean, there's two ways you can look at that. Either one, it's because they don't want everything to come out in the wash. But if they're coming to you particularly to say their story, and they usually a lot of the time say that they don't actually want the story out, they just wanted to tell somebody, like
Yes.
those are the ones that I always take to heart personally, because there's nothing to gain for that person on any aspect, especially if they just literally just wanted to be able to tell somebody.
Yeah. Well, and some of the best stories that have come to me have been in situations where, say, like, I've been at a party or a group of people who have no idea what I do. All right. And then once it gets out, then you almost always have, several people come to you with the experiences that they've had, just out of the blue. So, and I sincerely doubt that, somebody would just like very quickly make up a story just to lie to me in situations like that. Yeah. So yeah, the sometimes the best ones that I've been told have just been, these out of the blue chance meeting situations.
I mean, those are always the ones that like you try to create this community. You do like a podcast, for example, and there's like a certain level of comfort that people start to develop where they can feel like
Hmm.
they can come to you and be able to tell their stories. But then there's the other half of people who don't realize that we're just guys with microphones that like to research this kind of stuff, and they feel like we're kind of like out of reach, for example, for whatever reason. Which I'm just going to throw it out there, we're not out of reach. If you guys have any stories you guys want to tell us or share with us, we'd be happy to hear them.
Yeah.
But like a lot of the time people just don't know who to give the information to, because they don't know anybody in their own personal life. So especially when you have situations like you were just describing, like that may be some people's only opportunity to actually be able to tell somebody that's actually going to hear them out and listen. Because I mean, a lot of like the people who have experienced things, that are older than millennials, for example, aren't necessarily on the internet. I mean, even a lot of millennials aren't even necessarily on the internet. So,
Mhm.
they're not out here trying to find a community to tell the story to. It just kind of gets pushed into the back burner of their head. And then when somebody's actually in front of them that they can actually reside that in, then all of a sudden it springs back to the front, and it just makes them feel better just to be able to at least tell one person that's not calling them crazy by the end of it.
It's, it's so much easier now, um, for people because of the internet, and because of reality television too. When I got started, there was no internet. You had books basically and magazines, and that's where you'd get a lot of these stories, and that's where you would get information on who you could contact to tell your stories to, or to try to get more information. But now it's, the internet is kind of it's a double-edged sword, actually, because you now have a lot wider exposure to all this kind of, all these kinds of fascinating things. You don't have to just rely anymore on, say, in search of on television, or sightings, some of the early television shows. Um but then again, there is so much information on the internet that is, and I'm going to be polite about it, it's just bullshit.
Fantastical. We'll make it sound a little bit nicer.
No, 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 it's definitely not. But it is. I mean, there's a lot of information out there that is, you can't trust it. All right. And I always tell people that if they are trying to find more information about a subject that they're either interested in, or maybe they've had a similar experience, to don't just buy into everything that you read out there. And of course, it was the same way, when I was younger, and, with books and magazines and newspapers. I mean, you had to make sure that you vetted your information as best as you possibly could. Um, you know, Now, you can go and look for, say, like a certain story on a site, and then find it again on other sites, and see whether or not anybody has actually gone to original sources, or if they just keep repeating from other sites, this to, just copy and paste for their own site. There's a lot of places that are like that. I mean, that's all they do. They just copy and paste without trying to find out how much the original story is based on fact, whether or not the author got the facts right to begin with. Um, did they actually interview the people who had the experience, or did just all of that. So I always tell everyone to don't accept everything that you read just on first glance. You have to go and check it out for yourself, look for the sources yourself, and then then leave it up to you to decide if it sounds correct or not. um because, because again, I mean, there's a lot of lazy writing out there, and this is the type of subject that there's no room for lazy writers, because it's fantastical enough as it is. And there have been some really good and probably factual stories that have gotten either buried or tossed out because maybe somebody got a little bit of the information wrong, and then the skeptics jumped in and tore it all apart. Just one little drop of blood, and it's ripped apart, and not considered a viable case. So you just all researchers, all investigators, I mean, they really have to do their, due diligence, and make sure that everything that they write down and put out there is as accurate as they can possibly get it.
This is kind of thrown out of left field on this one, but I always kind of wondered too if there is a case that is just like one of those cases that they know somebody's going to get information out of. If again, because obviously the government doesn't want anybody to know about like UFOs, aliens, any of this weird phenomenon happening. It makes you wonder if there's a good case and it starts getting out, if it's there's intentional forces that'll purposely like start messing up information so that people stop looking at that case, because they I feel like at this point they know that they're not going to be able to completely cover anything up, so it more so becomes now covering the narrative, or changing the narrative and making it fit what you need it to be versus like completely hiding the information like they used to be able to do in the past, because that's almost impossible nowadays. So like I feel like a lot of this conspiracy stuff, a lot of this UFO stuff, paranormal stuff, if anything's super viable, there are forces at will that are purposely trying to dilute out the information.
I think that may have been more of a case in the past, especially when it came to UFOs. And like you said, it was probably easier to throw around misinformation, to discredit reports, especially anything having to do with military involvement, government involvement, intelligence, involvement. Um, Now I wonder if that's necessary anymore, because information is so easily gotten and spread that sometimes even the best and most exciting stories are hot for a couple of days and then that's it. Then they get buried by the next thing. So, really anymore, unless it's something that really may have a problem with national security, I think that the best thing that a lot of these operatives can do is nothing. Because it ultimately it won't matter, because you'll get a few people interested in the subject, but then the next thing comes along and then that's gone. It's buried. You go back in, say, like the late 70s and early 80s, when you had people, say, like Paul Benowitz in New Mexico, who thought that he was seeing UFOs flying around over the Kirkland Air Force Base there outside of Albuquerque, and he actually approached the superiors at the base and said, "Hey, I'm concerned that I see these UFOs flying over what appears to be areas where you're storing nuclear weapons." And there's the possibility that they were actually doing some kind of research, maybe with drones or who knows what, and so they deliberately started a campaign of disinformation against Paul Benowitz, feeding him stories that basically made him look like he was nuts. The giving him information saying that there were underground bases with aliens that had kidnapped human beings and were keeping them in vats to uh, do experiments on their genetics, and just the stories just got wilder and wilder, to the point where Paul actually had a nervous breakdown and had to be committed for a while, and then later committed suicide. So, and that's kind of an extreme example of the kind of manipulative misinformation that can go on. But whether or not they feel that that kind of manipulation is needed anymore, I don't know. I don't know. It's like I said before. There's so much information out there now that things can get buried so quickly that probably the best way to keep something covered up is just to say nothing about it at all.
Yeah, just let the news feed just cycle through and then just call it a day. I mean, we
Exactly.
kind of saw that recently with that whole new UFO phenomenon thing that was happening where, they first of all they didn't call them UFOs, they called them UAPs, and then everybody else started calling them UFOs, so I feel like that was an intentional thing like trying to control the narrative a little bit. And obviously, I don't think there were anything like that was actually like extraterrestrial UFOs. If anything, my kind of theory on it was I think that the government was just kind of letting people play into that name so that if anything weird did happen, they could easily just try to shoot it down and go, oh, it's just some kind of Chinese spy balloon or something like that.
Hmm.
And they can just kind of play it off and, kind of dilute out the information on it. And I was listening to somebody on a podcast recently, and we can get into this in a little bit about my kind of theory relating to this whole like transparent UFO thing. But it was somebody who was ex FBI or they work somewhere up in the government in like deep state. And they were pretty much saying that any real phenomenon you can't shoot down because they have these like transparent abilities where they can't actually get hit by anything that we shoot at them. And anything that you see that gets shot down, unless it was intentionally like crashed into something that wasn't didn't have anything to do with us, you can't shoot down like actual UFOs. And this was again coming from somebody that was part of the deep state, but you can only verify that so much and kind of take their word for what it is. But I
Right.
mean, as far as like what I've seen for a lot of stuff, it seems like I said we can get into this kind of theory on it, but this whole like transparent ability is more than just being transparent. It seems like things are able to go through it. And then you have a perfect example where what was it back in the Battle of Los Angeles or whatever
Right.
that was called when they're all shooting at the UFOs that were above this missile silo and none of them hit when all the smoke cleared, but they all happened to hit each other because they were shooting mortars and everything up and they're just coming back down. And then this thing just flew away like nothing happened afterwards. Like it's seen in all of these big cases that you can try to shoot them down, but that it's just they're functioning in a different way that we just aren't able to make contact with them like that.
Oh, exactly. Well, and uh, after the government shot down the Chinese balloon over the Atlantic, then there was three other cases where jets were scrambled to shoot down other unknown objects, and they're still referring to them as UAPs. But uh, no doubt that they were man-made objects, probably balloons of amateur balloons, things like that. Because as you said, throughout UFO history, and I'm using the term UFO. All right, I mean, UAPs was even though it's they're wanting to use that now. I mean, that's been around uh, almost as long as UFOs, but I like the word UFO.
That's kind of
But
where I'm at. I'll always use UFO.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, they've been attempting to shoot down UFOs for a number of years with, as far as we know, no success. So you can't tell me that all of a sudden now they can knock one out with a Sidewinder missile like they said they did. Okay. I mean, so they're using the word UAP just as a catch-all for anything that they can't currently identify, even though with these cases they were like, yeah, these were balloons, but we don't know whose balloons they were, so we're going to call them UAPs. So I mean, the actual unidentified flying objects that fly around with the wild maneuvers and obviously are exhibiting exotic forms of propulsion, those those can't be shut down, or at least they can't be shut down easily. Yeah, I'll put it that way. I mean, because it's like I said, I mean, all the way back into the like late 40s and early 50s, there were a couple of times when and not just the United States, but other countries as well, the planes were ordered, military planes were ordered to try to shoot these crafts down with no success at all, and sometimes to the detriment of the plane and the pilots who were attempting to shoot these things down. They, what was it? There was the case over Tehran. in what was it, like 76, I think. Don't quote me up, but it was definitely, in the late 70s, when every time the pilots would get a radar lock on this craft, their instruments would suddenly die, to the point where they almost lost control of the craft, of the jet. And then the UFO would, skitter out of the way, and everything would power back up again. One of the pilots, I think, actually, their cockpit actually got so hot. They were bathed in a like a light from the ship, and the cockpit heated up to the point where they thought that they were going to have to eject. Yeah, that the aircraft was just going to explode right then and there. So these recent cases where they said that they're able to shoot these things down. Nah, those definitely were balloons. Maybe more, maybe more the Chinese or other countries' balloons. Or I think one of them was actually like an amateur group from the United States who had they had spent some money to try to get one of these balloons with radio instruments up to the edge of space, and it got to a certain point, and then suddenly it disappeared, and then the announcement came, oh, the Air Force shot down a UAP over the, I think it was like Lake Huron, one of those situations, and these guys are just like, ah.
Quick, throw all the equipment out. We have no tie to
Yeah,
it because the government found it.
But yeah, I mean, these kind of cases, I mean, they're actual UFOs are a lot more difficult to pin down or shoot down than any conventional balloon.
Before I get into my weird theories on the whole transparent displacement thing, I'm sure with your research, you probably have your own theories on it. I'd love to hear what you've kind of realized, what you've kind of come to as like a reason why these things are translucent or able to kind of disappear away from actually being shot down.
Hmm. Well, I mean, I have theories and ideas, and all of that won't even buy you a cup of coffee. It's meaningless because we don't understand what we're dealing with. I mean, we're seeing things that at times look physical and then don't. They're able to maneuver around like there's nothing in their way. I mean, conventional aircraft, not only do they have to maneuver, based on gravity and inertia and atmospheric friction and things like that. The UFOs, it's just like they could just be flying in the middle of space, for as far as they're concerned. It's like our physical reality doesn't have any effect on them at all, but they appear to be physical. All right. Until they're not physical. So it's to me, it seems rather obvious that we're dealing with something that is able to maneuver in and out of our reality. And it's, I wonder sometimes whether or not they are actually in our reality. Um, whether or not we're just seeing a projection from someplace else into our reality, to the point where they actually land and things get out, and then actually have physical interactions with people. Um, so I mean, I don't really have any theories. I've got ideas and mind games, so to speak, but it's all really, it's all just a big mystery. And if you go and I definitely avoid trying to say, well, UFOs appear to be transdimensional objects that, when they come, to within our reality in the quantum mechanical field, they, no, I'm not going to do that because I have no idea. All I know is that there are things that people see that are extraordinary, act in ways that don't appear to be how things normally act within our three-dimensional reality. And other than that, your theory is just as good as my theory because I don't have any. And until they actually make an appearance and, bring out their books and journals and logs and blueprints to explain how it all works, that's really all we have. We just have theories.
Yeah, we're just shooting in the dark
We
essentially.
are. Yeah, we are. We are.
I mean, as far as like my kind of idea of what I think it could theoretically be is actually it was kind of inspired by talking to a few people, and one of them was the first time you came on the show where you were talking about the one ship that somebody came up to and it was vibrating at a high rate that it was producing heat and it ended up actually burning the person.
Right.
That connected in with another guy I had on the show who was doing some research over this volcano in Mexico and was talking about how he was watching this weird phenomenon, how he'd watch these ships fly in solid and then stop, split into two, but look transparent and fly off somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So I started connecting and wondering if obviously all particles are always in motion, they're always vibrating at different speeds. So if you were able to create a technology where you could essentially vibrate at a different frequency than what our reality consisted of, you could either one make it so that those particles essentially are able to translucently like fly through any object that's in our reality because the particles aren't actually colliding, they're actually separating on like a microscopic level. And then extending past that, when you see like the solid ship turn into two, I wonder if they're able to actually take the particles from one area, if they already have that technology in order to vibrate them at different frequencies to pass through things, and if they can essentially basically like take those particles and have half of the particles here, half the particles there. So anybody that's looking at it, you can't really shoot or do anything with either of them because they're not fully manifested into that area because the particles have been split. And in turn, it may also kind of create like a decoy where maybe one of them is like the main consciousness of like the people that are or the things that are flying the ship, and the other one's more of like the decoy of it, where maybe the ship's particles displace but their particles don't necessarily, so then they have this split off. And then a lot of the time too, I've seen it where they like reconnect and they look like they're solid again.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been kind of wondering if it has to do with these vibrations that they're producing, and if they're able to vibrate something that we can't understand, where they're able to basically just have their particles vibrating so different than matter in our reality that they can pretty much just go through it because none of the particles actually ever even touch each other or collide.
Yeah, that's and if you notice in your research that and that's an interesting point with the vibrations, because when you see these things in the air, a lot of times they glow certain colors, all right? When they come down to land, that glow disappears and it's like they solidify, all right? And just before they take off, that glow reappears around their ship, or whatever it is. It levitates into the air, and a lot of times the colors will change, and each count will be different. Sometimes it'll shift to, say, like a red color or green or blue or what have you. But there's something with that vibrational shift maybe that then creates a light from a different part of the spectrum, and then it takes off, splits into two or disappears, what have you. um, one idea that somebody told me one time, that possibly we're dealing with things that are from, say, like not not a third dimensional reality. but and even beyond, say, like the fourth dimension. And they likened it to if we were fish in an aquarium, all right? And somebody would go and stick their finger into the top of the water. Well, the fish would just see that small portion of your finger flying around at the top of their water. Not understanding that that's just a tiny segment of something bigger. And say you put your like a second finger in, it's like, oh my God, look, it split in two. And then you withdraw both of them quickly. It's like, it just vanished. So, could we be fish in a fishbowl someplace and somebody's, sticking their fingers into the water, and that's what we're seeing.
That's something I've actually been kind of wondering lately too, and I've been trying to figure out exactly like what portion of the ship that could potentially be. Like maybe what we're looking at is just like some part of like the propulsion system. We're not actually even seeing like the actual ship itself. It's almost like kind of like you were saying, like if you put like a boat in the top of the water, all you'd be seeing is like the line down the middle and like the propeller. Like maybe that's kind of what we're seeing is just the propulsion unit, but we're not actually seeing the portion of the ship where there's actually inhabitants really on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the I think that there may also be say like a social or cultural bias in play as well, that our perception of these things when they enter our reality can actually be manipulated by our expectations of them. It's like uh, when people used to believe, say, like in angels, and would see what they would call a fiery chariot blazing across the sky, uh, and that's what they saw. They saw the wheels turning, they saw the angels whipping the horses and things like that. Well, we don't believe now in angels or fiery chariots. Instead, we think along more scientific terms of actual physical spaceships coming down and landing. And so that is what we are seeing. And whatever this phenomena is, that it is at least partially able to be manipulated by our unconscious belief systems. So if we had the opportunity to go 500 years into the future, and the phenomena is still presenting itself to us in a fashion that we don't understand, will we still be seeing spacecrafts from other planets, or will our cultural and social expectations 500 years in the future present us with something different? We're still not able to understand what we're seeing, so we're going to manipulate it into something that is acceptable to us. That's not saying that the phenomena isn't real. What I'm saying is that we have the ability actually to put these things into categories that our minds can accept. And if they're so far outside of what our minds can understand, then we don't see anything.
See, I was kind of wondering too, kind of playing into what you were saying, if it's a matter of like their interaction with us in the aspect of, back in the day, they could come and everybody would think they were a king or a god. So
Mhm.
pretty much they would, show up and they just got welcomed at that point
Mhm.
because everybody was like, oh, this is a god. This is somebody from the sky. So there's no like, not, I don't want to say fear for them, but no like worry about anybody trying to come after them or like kind of push it further than that. Where now at this point, I feel like if they do ever become physical, if they're able to land and become physical, or if they are just physical to begin with, now they have to worry about the fear of like once they stop and land here and actually get out of the ship, like how are people going to react? Are we going to shoot them? Are we going to try to kill them? Are we going to do whatever? Are we going to actually listen to them? Like they're not going to have the same form of like power than they would back in the day, because I feel like back in the day they could just walk out and ask people to do stuff and people would do it. Now people's first reaction is going to be to shoot at them or do whatever. So going into the future, I wouldn't even be surprised if as we advance our weapons, because as humans I feel like it's just something that we're naturally going to do and there's no fight back from it. Like humans are naturally like a wars type of civilization. If they're just going to start coming less and less in the future once we develop weapons where we can actually do something to them, because they don't have the same power that they did. And if they get to a certain point where we actually kind of start to line up with them as far as technology goes, then they may not have a reason to come here because it's not worth the danger, because we'd be even more so looked at as like the primitive beings that now have advanced weapons versus, you know, the primitive beings that have explosives, and they're like, okay, cool, whatever, we can kind of just stay back and watch and blow each other up if we have to. But once we start getting into things where we could possibly like, you know, shoot off like a nuke or something and it echoes between dimensions, I feel like a UFO wouldn't necessarily be able to escape something if the impact or explosion is able to almost go interdimensional, even in like the core of where like the initial explosion's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Because even if it's just like a small little spot that's able to like hit multiple dimensions at once, I feel like that may be the ting that might actually be able to start damaging their ship.
Well, if you look back throughout history, whatever the intelligence is that is involved with this phenomena, it's never been easy for them to interact with people. All right. There's all kinds of historical accounts of people attacking these things with whatever weapons they have available, even if it's just rocks and mud. So I think that's one of the reasons why you never, very rarely do you ever have um, close encounter events where there are more than just one or two or a handful of people at the most. All right. Any more than that can be problematic. Always has been, probably always will be. Uh, so, but then again, you know, even with individual accounts of these things, trying to interact with a person, say like on a dark road or in the woods or something like that, that can be problematic as well, because people naturally will either respond to these kind of situations with the the fight or flight response. They'll either try to run away or they'll try to attack out of fear. Um, but the majority of the times, whatever these intelligence are able to keep themselves protected. You know, the puny humans really can't haven't been able to do that much. You know, and there have been, you know, like modern accounts of people actually, you know, shooting guns, shotguns, things like that at the craft. And again, going back to the military craft, you know, actually, you know, shooting uh, explosive rounds or even missiles. But you know, most of the time, uh, uh, these weapons are useless. They'll either just it's like you said earlier, you'll just seem to go through them or bounce off. Um, so it's it's difficult to say if we are dealing, and again, you know, we're back to speculation and theory here. You know, if we're dealing with something that is, you know, interdimensional, interreality, whatever that means, or if we're dealing with something that is present here on the planet with us, but either existing on a different vibrational rate or what have you. Uh, they seem to have the ability, for the most part, to avoid violence from us, and have probably learned from interacting with us for thousands of years that you can't trust us, because that you know it, that threat of violence will always be there. Uh, and that could very well be why we're seeing them present themselves in ways that would almost prevent a lot of people from going the violent route. It's like you said, at one time, they would present themselves as gods or angels, or some kind of deity types of figures. Well, you don't go and take a pitchfork to God.
Hmm.
That would not be a good thing to do. Kind of the same way today, if you present yourself as a extraterrestrial from another planet, I think that most people, even though their first reaction would be to attack, that would quickly be superseded by, no, wait, I better not do that. This is something that could, you know, uh, either attack back, with the ray gun, or
Hmm.
you just don't do this. This could be a friendly visitor from another planet. You don't attack it. So, I mean, we've been left with this mindset for quite a while now, and and as well, we also are seeing, and this is something that we can get into um, when we discuss my latest book. There's also this mental manipulation that takes place that almost shuts down a person's mind to the point where the thought of violence just completely goes out of their heads. And instead, they're just like awestruck to the point of being almost paralyzed. I've talked to a lot of people who will have these encounters, and they would say, my normal reaction to something like this would be to turn tail and just run like hell. But no, instead, I stood there and I looked up at this thing with my arms outstretched, almost as if I was inviting them to land and have a beer with me. And you hear that a lot. So they're,
I've been wondering if that has to do with lights too, because you were talking about the lights earlier,
Mhm.
and like humans, of course, think of lights as just like, ooh, pretty color. But I think there's a lot more to it than that as far as the extraterrestrials go. Because I've talked to a lot of people who've had a lot of different experiences, and I've asked people in particular, like when they've had abduction experiences, different things like that, like what color light they were seeing. Because we already kind of know that, like with psychology, like you see like a police light when you see the red and you see the blue and they flash back and forth, it like basically shuts your mind down where you can't think
Mhm.
properly, so you're just more like prone to just kind of sit there and be docile. So we already kind of have the working of knowing that certain colors react with the brain in certain ways, especially when flashed or done properly. So when it comes to these UFOs, for example, I wonder if they know this kind of stuff way more in depth, where they know that they can use this certain shade of this certain color and it'll just completely wipe your mind where you just watch in awe, or they can even use another color and it basically just freezes everything. Because
Mhm.
I've heard of a few people that have talked about how they've seen green and it looks like everybody in the room is frozen or they're not moving at the same speed as them. And them in particular, the person who was being abducted or who was having contact, was basically reacting like this green wasn't doing anything to them, but everything else in the room is reacting to it. So just like weird things like that. But it seems like green for them almost like freezes people.
Mhm. Well, there are self-protection flashlights that are now available any anywhere, that uses a strobe light to basically, I don't know if immobilize would be the right word, but you flash this strobe light at, say, like in an attacker's face, and it's enough to stop them in their tracks long enough for you to get the hell out of there. So yes, definitely, a lot of these cases, especially the close encounter cases, even bedroom abductions, a lot of times start with an almost blinding flash of bright light.
See, and I always heard a thing with humming too. So I'm also
Mhm.
kind of wondering if connecting in with the light, that they use a combination of light and a certain sound frequency that, again, like we already know that sound frequencies will make people think certain ways or act certain ways. So it could be something that's so far beyond our realm that we're not even able to like hear it or register it, or you're just barely able to hear it or register it where you notice like a hum, but it could be a frequency that's completely like locking out part of your brain
Mhm.
from working properly.
Right. Well, and again, I mean, from our own ultra human scientific studies, I mean, we've learned that certain sound frequencies do have an effect on our brain. I mean, just look at music. Look how certain notes, certain tones, chords, things like that will have emotional effects on us. So, John Keel, he wrote about when he was investigating the TNT area in Point Pleasant when he was researching the whole Mothman thing. He found an area that he called the Zone of Terror, and it was on this little country road, and he said that it was not very big, but if you entered this little area that seemed to be going across this road, he would be he just had this feeling of terror that just engulfed him, that it made him want to get in his car and just get the heck out of there as quickly as he could. The hair rose in the back of his neck. But he said that if he kept walking, he just only had to walk like 4 or 5 feet and he was out of it. So he felt like that this was something that was being projected from somewhere, maybe ultrasonic. He wasn't sure. He's just hazarding a guess that but he couldn't trace the source of where this sound uh, 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 and again he was just speculating that it was sound was coming from. Well, we also know from scientific experiments that certain frequencies of sounds can produce almost a ghostly like feelings in people. They'll have the hair raised in the back of their neck. They'll feel like that there's something looking over their shoulders, and this is just nothing more than certain frequencies on the ultrasonic spectrum of audio. So, yeah, like you said, if you have got an intelligence that is well versed in our own physiology, it wouldn't take a lot of research to determine just what could be used to manipulate us and prevent us from being dangerous, keep us docile for whatever purposes, and basically control and manipulate us.
I mean, I've been kind of on this theory lately too about them possibly being, because theoretically, if time travel is possible, it's always been possible.
Mhm.
So I've come kind of wondering if a lot of these extraterrestrials, especially because people talk about different races where they're more human like, and then you have like the grays where they almost seem like they could be like a further on push of the same thing, possibly. Like maybe some of these phenomenon is actually us coming back and interacting with us. And that's how we know how people are going to think. And that's how we know what things to avoid, is because these extraterrestrials are actually us from different points in time. And then when you have things like Valiant Thor, or the Nordics, or the ones that are a little bit closer to where we're at currently,
Mhm.
maybe those are like 200 years in the future. And then when you have like the tall grays, maybe they're us from like 300, 400 years in the future. And especially with this whole like converging of like races and culture and everything like that, it's only a matter of time where we're eventually going to become like a human race on the planet. There's not going to be all the different races because everything's going to become so intermixed that eventually, could be 1,000 years down the line, could be a couple hundred years down the line, we're all eventually going to become basically like the same racial buildup, because we're not separated like we used to be in the past, where it was only like certain people in certain regions would be reproducing with certain people. Now the world's all mixed, everybody's reproducing with each other. So again, maybe it's them, it's us coming back from the future. And assumably, just like people, if we had the ability to go way back in the past, we would definitely take advantage of that and pretend like we're gods. And a lot of this like interaction that we've had, I don't know, I see it as very like human like. It seems like something that I could definitely see humans doing. Even just like the blind research on things, putting probes in the back of things' necks or whatever, just trying to kind of get an idea of like how they function. I mean, it's no different than how we interact with nature now, where, you know, we're sitting here and we like tag fish and we tag animals and everything. The animal itself, it doesn't know what the hell is going on. They're getting picked out of their habitat and they're getting something
Mhm.
shoved in them. They're having this traumatic experience and they're getting thrown back. And we know that we're not hurting them, but we're still a traumatic experience for them. You look at it from a broader standpoint that, you know, they're doing it for the sake of research, or even again, it could be us. And you're taking people and those people are having a traumatic event. But if you know you're not actually hurting them, you're like, oh, you'll be fine. You throw them back into the wild after you tag them, you know. And I mean, that could literally be what the phenomenon is just us trying to get an understanding of like us from the past. Because even if we keep progressing as a culture, it seems like a lot of these like tall grays and things don't necessarily have like reproductive organs in the way society is now. I mean, if things keep progressing in the manner they are, maybe we'll get to a point where we're not able to just reproduce all in ourselves and we need to rely on something else to reproduce from for us. And maybe when it gets so far in the future, you know, we'll kind of want to push back from that and be able to reproduce from ourselves. And maybe that's where a lot of the interest comes from with when they're like probing things, for example, or taking like semen specimens, or, you know, having like these hybrid babies with like humans that are like present day humans.
Mhm.
You know, maybe that's not like them trying to hide themselves among us. Maybe they're intentionally trying to mix their future DNA with our past DNA to make it so that they're able to reproduce again in the future without having some type of technology to reproduce.
That you know that that theory has always been one of my favorite speculations about the UFO mystery, is that we're dealing, at least partially, with time travelers. And you're correct. I mean, if somewhere in the future we do discover that time travel is possible, then there's no reason to think that our visitors would come from just one specific point in time. That they would probably be able to recruit uh, 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 people from different eras, and that's why you're seeing just this whole, this huge mixture of different kinds of humanoid creatures, right up to people that look like modern day, either businessmen, with their suits or ties, or wearing military uniforms and things like that. And I should point out, first of all, that right now on planet Earth, the human race is so closely related. What was it? I think that most of us are about like fifth or sixth cousins from everybody else. That's how.
I mean, one third of people in the world share DNA with Genghis Khan. So, I mean, that
Yep.
just shows how vast just that little thing happening in the past of this guy going around from place to place and having intercourse with the women has his DNA takes up a third of the world. Like, that's insane.
Right. And the genetic differences between you and me and everybody else is really small at this point. And all the other stuff that a lot of people love to try to find differences with each other, skin color and things like that. Those are just real. Those are superficial. They have really nothing to do with anything. So if if you go into the future far enough, it's probably going to get to the point where breeding is going to be difficult because of the genetic similarities, and then problems and mutations that's going to start cropping up because everyone is so genetically similar. So if you get to that point and then you are able to achieve time travel, then it's not going to be a far reach of the imagination that somebody's going to consider. Maybe if we go back into the past and get us some fresh DNA, some fresh genetic material to shore up our interbred race, then they're going to do it. And that's not to say that a lot of these cases don't also involve what we would term as extraterrestrials, because we live in a big universe. Probably there's life all over the place. Why would we be the only ones who would discover time travel? So, more than likely, we're going to be dealing with time travelers not only from our future, but from other races' futures as well. And then throw in the whole possibility of different realities and interdimensional realities. It all, I think, probably starts to blur together at a certain point, to the point where none of it makes sense and all of it makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it definitely made
uh,
sense to me.
uh,
I was even thinking too that like a lot of we have these ones that are very human-like, and then we also have these ones that are very like
mhm.
insect-like. Like people talking about the mantis beings, and then even like the reptilians, for example. And another thing that I was thinking as you were kind of describing that is, I mean, there could of course be different things coming in from different realities, different places, or just to throw in another theory, those could be time travelers from another point in time, because
Oh yeah.
assumably, there's going to be great cataclysms. There's already been multiple cataclysms, and every time that happens, human race gets dwindled down, and then again you have to kind of populate from like a smaller group of people to expand it back out. And if there's multiple cataclysms that happen through time, maybe the tall grays are the last of like the humans, and then maybe at some point like we leave this reality or we leave this time, and then maybe there's been enough great cataclysms where maybe only certain types of insects actually lived, and then because they were the dominant thing on the planet after that, they started to adapt and become like the main living component of the
Mhm.
planet. So then maybe we're looking at these like insect looking extraterrestrials like they're coming from different places, but maybe they could be like 1,000 years in the future when everything's died off on the planet besides different types of insects, and then they became the main like consciousness for the planet. So then they just eventually ended up adapting and becoming something that's able to take up the
Mhm.
environment and became more human like. Because I've kind of started to wonder if like the end all for evolution or adaptation, whatever you want to call it, is essentially that everything will eventually become 2 hands and 2 feet with the head up on top, because that's the easiest way I feel to be able to interact with your environment before you transcend to that next level of being like a fourth dimensional being. Like I feel like this is like what kind of like humans are, and what all these extraterrestrials are is like the peak of physical reality existence as far as like being able to interact with it.
Well, at least on Earth, because and in my latest book, mimics the others among us. One of the questions that I bring up is why the human shape? Why the humanoid shape? All of these interactions that we have been talking about in this show right now, and in other conversations as well, um, with these things, whether they are coming from flying saucers or haunted houses or what have you, that human shape is predominant. Um, yeah, we get the insectoids, we get the reptilians, but those really are statistically small compared to the almost indistinguishable human shapes that we get that interact with us. Um, and you were talking about the gathering of genetic material, which has been a big thing with the whole abduction phenomena. That you have people like Dr. David Jacobs, who feel that we're dealing with extraterrestrials who are trying to create a hybrid race to shore up their genetic problems by using human genetics to create a hybrid race. All right.
And weirdly enough, actually correcting our genetics in the
Yes.
process, taking the best of both to create the ultimate.
Now, the funny thing is that you go back, say, 500 years ago with the stories of the good people, fairies, elves, creatures like that. Lots of stories of these things also falling in love or just having sexual relations with humans because they needed our genetic material to keep their races viable. All right. Like I'm saying, these are stories from hundreds of years ago with creatures that supposedly have nothing to do with, UFOs or extraterrestrials, but the stories are still the same. They're doing the same kind of things. All right. So once again, what are we dealing with here? Is this, like we were talking about, are these things time travelers that are doing the same thing that they're doing, now? We perceive them as extraterrestrials coming for genetic material. 500 years ago, we perceive them as, fairies, ladies of the lakes, those kind of things, who find humans attractive enough uh, 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 to have sexual relations and children with. So it's once again. I mean, we have got these same kind of entities appearing to us throughout time with the same kind of games, the same kind of tricks and manipulations, but they're wearing different faces. They have on different masks.
See, that kind of goes into this other thing that I've been kind of on this whole idea lately too, that all of these things could essentially be the same thing, but coming at it from a little bit of a different angle of, if we're in some type of like organic simulation, assumably there's going to be things outside of it that want to be able to come in and interact with
Mhm.
us. So, just imagine somebody playing, this is the analogy I've been using, but imagine somebody playing Grand Theft Auto and the game eventually isn't going to be good enough where they don't want the NPCs just mindlessly walking down the street. They want them to interact and be scared if they do something or whatever. So if there was something that created essentially like a video game, but they want it to be better and better to the point where the NPCs became conscious, then there's, of course they're going to still come in and play the game, and all of the NPCs aren't going to be aware that they're actually in some form of a game. So I've often wondered if a lot of the weird phenomenon we get, be it paranormal, aliens, Sasquatch, Mothman, all of this stuff, could all essentially be whatever is outside of the system, just picking different playable characters to come into the system and play as. Or another one that you could even throw in is kind of like matches in with what you were saying, is that maybe our planet is, and I've heard this theory a lot, some type of like a stockpile for
Mm.
DNA, where maybe it's more so that it's not that all of these places are coming to us because they're like interested in something that we're doing, but rather we're the stockpile of all of their DNA that they just kind of leave us off in the corner of the galaxy so that nothing else can interact with it. And everything only comes here when they're trying to collect stuff or they need stuff. And the rest of the time, of course, they don't want the DNA to die, so they have to keep it
Mhm.
alive. So, of course, they want a living planet for this DNA to stay alive rather than like a vault somewhere, because you're looking at it from, again, like a future standpoint. It's a lot easier to take DNA and do experiments off of an actual physical being versus like trying to take like DNA of something, turn it into that, and then experiment off of it. It's, it's avoiding the step essentially. We're just like an area that they're just keeping with DNA that's just sitting for whenever they need it, it's available.
That's a really good point, because you look at planet Earth and all of the different kinds of life that we have here. It's amazing. Uh the life forms that have evolved on this planet and continue to evolve. And I mean, and that's an excellent point. I mean, that we could actually be, a reservoir, so to speak, of life. That you started out knowing that it's going to grow and proliferate, and that you can come here at any time and take what you need, because you as long as you don't exploit it to the extreme, that you can come back later and there'll be more. uh, and it's the fascinating thing about the way that life grows and evolves, on this planet. Again, it comes back to that humanoid shape that we were talking about, because so many of these encounters that people have with UFOs or with the others involves beings that look human. Sometimes there are differences, larger heads, bigger eyes, weird things like that, but still that superficial shape is there. Two arms, two legs, a head with two eyes. um so if you consider what we understand about evolution and the way that life develops, to me it doesn't seem likely that humanoid shape would evolve on a planet in a completely different solar system, maybe in a completely different galaxy, to look so much like us and to be so similar to us genetically that you could actually come to Earth from your planet and interbreed with us. All right, with the exception that maybe we're related to these other life forms from other planets. Maybe they left us here, started us here, and that's the reason why we're related to them. That's um, all of the old mythologies of ancient civilizations always talked about how the gods came to planet Earth and left a part of themselves here to grow as us. So if you take that into consideration, I mean that could be a good possibility of why you have that ubiquitous um, human shape. But again, I mean, we're presenting this in the form of extraterrestrial visitors, and in my book Mimics, you know we have all kinds of different things going on. I mean, not only do you have the extraterrestrial hypothesis, we have maybe cousin species that like the Denisovians or what have you, that evolved on this planet right alongside of us, but at some point decided that they didn't want to interact with us anymore and moved at first out into the deserts or the far away places to get away from us, eventually maybe going underground or under the oceans, but still physical creatures just like us, close enough to us genetically that they could breed with us when needed. Um, you look at cases of cryptid creatures, and I'm thinking along the lines of Bigfoot and wild men and things like that. Again, you have this all too human shape to them, and a lot of rumors, especially say from native populations, Native American and other indigenous people, who talked about how these creatures at times would come in and raid villages and steal women to for the purposes of interbreeding. And you see this same kind of story playing in and out throughout history. And I'll say it again, the faces may look a little different, but I think underneath we may be dealing with the same kind of entities.
See, one thing I've wondered, at least for like the human shape, at least, like maybe that's like the original DNA. and they leave it here because they know that they have to mix that with everything else. So assumably you'd want things to kind of be at different points so things aren't interacting and fighting with each other. So maybe, you drop this DNA here, you drop this DNA here and here. This one adapts to at this rate, this one adapts at this rate, and this one's way faster
Hmm.
than the other ones. So maybe either one, like the whole human construct is like the base DNA to almost be able to create everything. Like maybe everything kind of resorts back to one particular thing. Or two, maybe it was a matter of it's almost like, if you set up a garden and then you never touched it, eventually it's going to start overgrowing at certain spots. So, you drop this DNA here of like a primate, one of a reptilian, and one of like an insect all on the same
Hmm.
planet. But then the human primate DNA adapts faster than all the other DNA. So then you have this species that's way more adapted than the other ones are, where they're still, in a they're not at like the same level of consciousness. And then maybe that's where you get all of this like angry interaction from like all these extraterrestrials, where we look at like reptilians and like the insectoids like they're against us. And that may be because they see us as the enemy, because this was the stockpile planet for everybody's DNA, and ours advanced faster than theirs. So now we're destroying their DNA database. So then they don't like us because, we're destroying where they're trying to save everything. And then you have the extraterrestrials like the Tall Greys and like Valiant Thor, who's like one of the Nordics, who come and they try to tell people, like, all right, enough with the weapons, enough with this. We're going to help you guys out, but you need to stop with this stuff. Maybe that's because these other extraterrestrial races are like, all right, man, you need to get your DNA in check because it's destroying ours, and we're not going to have a database anymore if yours keeps destroying this entire place where we store
Hmm.
everything.
Oh yeah. Well, you look at the old, especially like the 1950s contactees, and I mean that was the favorite story with them, is that they were here to warn us about our use of atomic weapons. You're going to blow the earth up, and not only are you going to blow the earth up, but it's going to infect the entire solar system and the entire galaxy with your weapons, which is pretty unlikely. Now, not unlikely that we can blow the earth out from underneath us with atomic weapons, but having it affect the rest of the solar system or galaxy, yeah, that's probably not going to happen. But
Unless we're that DNA
yeah,
stockpile.
well, see, yeah, that's just it. If you're dealing with something that is also living here with us, but in secret, then yeah, you've got a vested interest to stop that the human race from developing these weapons of mass destruction, because not only are they going to blow themselves up, but they're going to blow everybody else up as well, including the other DNA stock, like you said. So and now, with a lot of these abduction cases, people are being told about pending environmental disasters that that we need to prevent from happening. So it's again, you know, the atomic threat is still there, but the concern now seems to be more the prevention of, say, like global warming, or polluting ourselves and everything else into oblivion. So yeah, I mean, I do think that there's the possibility that we're dealing with things that are right here with us, and are concerned with what we're doing, because it's going to affect them one way or the other, somehow.
I mean, not to get too conspiratorial too, but maybe that's where the whole like reptilian and insectoid thing comes in, is that they know that their DNA is going to thrive in hot human environments. So, you hear this whole push about like the reptilians hiding in the government, things like that, and they're pushing all of this like weather agenda type stuff. Maybe the intention is, again, that they know that their DNA is finally going to thrive, because maybe after thousands of years of them being like, hey, keep the humans in check, otherwise we're going to have a problem, they just said, all right, you don't want to keep the humans in check, we're just going to try to make our DNA flourish. And maybe there's this underground battle that we don't really know about each one of these different races trying to keep their DNA safe on this planet, and trying to make the planet adapt to what their DNA needs in order to thrive, because they're not working all together anymore.
The UFO researcher Daryl Sims, who has been really big into trying to gather um, samples of implants from abductees. He helped Dr. Richard Lear, especially in trying to surgically remove some of these implants, and with some really surprising successes. But
Is he the guy that goes to conventions with the case that has just like a bunch of different UFO objects? Because I remember my co-host on my other show, Orin and Jennie, telling me, I think it may have been the same guy who he was wearing like a
that's
cowboy
him.
hat and stuff, and he said that he had this case, yep, that was just full of different implants and different things that he's gotten, and he's like more than happy to show everybody all this weird stuff that he's pulled out of
Yep,
people.
yep, yeah. That's well, and unfortunately, Dr. Lear has passed away. So I mean, Daryl hasn't been able to, find another doctor who's willing to, risk his career, unfortunately, to help some of these alleged abductees find out if they actually do have implants or not. But Daryl has a theory that we have never actually, and Daryl is a believer in the extraterrestrial hypothesis of UFOs, but he has a theory that we have never actually seen or dealt with the actual extraterrestrials that are visiting Earth, and that instead the grays and the insectoids and the reptoids and all these other creatures that we've run across are actually biological robots, manipulations from various genetics that have been taken right from this planet. So the insectoids would actually be DNA from insects from planet Earth that were then biologically manipulated to create semi-intelligent beings to then come and interact with us. Because they're from Earth, they can operate on Earth. Same way with the reptilians and these other creatures. While the real intelligence behind all these things is the unknown. We've never dealt with them. They may be in a form that is completely incomprehensible to us. But that's the theory that he works with, and to me, something like that makes a lot of sense, and would explain a lot why we we deal with so many different forms of these entities. I mean, it's almost to the point a lot of times where each event has a unique creature that does the interaction. So, I mean, if we're dealing with something that is actually being created someplace else and then sent here to do their dirty work, so to speak, uh, then yeah, the actual extraterrestrial intelligence has never been seen and may never ever be seen because it may be we can't even perceive or conceive uh, that kind of life form. Because face it, we have very limited eyesight. We have very limited senses. I mean, we evolved basically just so we wouldn't get eaten by that tiger. You know, we
Mm-hmm.
evolved to hide in bushes, climb trees, and that's about it. So anything outside of those of our senses, we can't even if it appeared to us, we may not even be able to see it because we can't conceive it. All right.
I mean, that even fits in with what, the whole angels
Mhm.
thing, that there's the biblical depiction of an angel versus what
Mhm.
we have decided what an angel looks like. Like even connecting with that, it still kind of fits what you're
Right. Well,
describing.
and it goes back to something that I had said earlier about how the phenomena is able to manipulate itself with the help of our with our unconscious perceptions of reality, so that it could actually appear to us and interact with us, and we would never be able to see it or even understand it. All right. So instead, we see all the things that that we've been talking about, you know. But the true source, the true reality of it is just inconceivable. You know, it's kind of like scholars used to like to talk about God, and that the true face, the true nature of God is just absolutely inconceivable to us, and that's why we have physical deities such as Jesus or Buddha or things like that. We can grasp that, we can understand that, but the true source of the divine is completely outside of our understanding and perception. And it could very well be with the actual source of the intelligence that we have been dealing with. It's just beyond our comprehension.
I mean, that would completely fit, and that makes more sense to me than a lot of theories I've heard. And I've never actually sat down and really ever heard that one. And it makes sense to me because just as humans being way less advanced in these things, no matter what way you look at it, like we are significantly less advanced, we already have the idea when we go into war to use drones. Like we are getting to a point where we don't even want to send normal
Mhm.
people in because we know it's not safe. We'd rather just send in these drones. So, assumably, if there's something that's way more advanced than us, they already are way past the drone idea, and then they started incorporating like biological
Mhm.
drones, which is exactly what we could be seeing. And that fits on so many different levels, even for the aspect of like how they get here, how they travel so fast. It's because they are here because they were created here and just dropped here.
Mhm.
And this consciousness that exists, the actual extraterrestrials, could be off somewhere completely different. And they just, again, use their abilities to be able to adapt and make something here. And that would also explain why they seem like really emotionless. And you even use the term
Mhm.
robotic. And uh, probably at least half of the people I've talked to that have had encounters have said that they feel robotic when they talk to them, and they just don't feel like they're obviously like advanced, but they don't seem like they're like as conscious as us.
Mhm.
And that could be the reasoning behind it, is because these things we're interacting with aren't actually conscious. They're just essentially like biological drones.
Oh yeah, exactly. And and it's like you said, I mean, in a lot of these cases where people do have face-to-face interactions with these beings, and a lot of times um these things don't appear as, like, extraterrestrials, or or anything really bizarre, but instead, they come knocking on your door, you know, with some kind of, they're selling photographs of the neighborhood or just some stupid thing like that. And the weird thing is that in a lot of cases, people will just throw their doors open and say, "Come on in, come sit on my couch. Let me bring you coffee. Tell me all about your stuff." And then afterwards, they'll say, "I have no idea why I did that." You know, I would never just open my door and invite a stranger into my house. Yet I hear that time and time again with these kinds of encounters. And then after, these things are led into their house and they start having a conversation, is when they start to realize that there's something off about them. Like you said, some people well, I mean, there was one case where the person said that the guy didn't seem real, that there was something wrong with them. They weren't real. And I always found that fascinating. What do you mean by not real? It's just they weren't real. Their skin wasn't right. Um, the way that they talked wasn't right. they weren't real. And
Even like the Men in Black things where people hand them food and they act like they have no idea how to eat it. Like,
right.
assumably anything biological needs to eat food, but if it's some type of biological drone, it may not
Right.
necessarily need to
There
eat
was a
it.
case where a woman had a rather mundane UFO sighting. Never told anybody about it. A couple days later, she got a knock on her door, and there was like an Air Force colonel, American Air Force colonel, at her door. Dressed in his military outfit, had a briefcase. Wanted to come in to talk about her UFO experience. First of all, this surprised her because she hadn't told anybody about it. But I mean, this was in the 60s, and there was a little bit more respect towards the military then. So she let this guy in. He seemed to have all the proper credentials, and she had just made Jello, and it was still in the refrigerator, and had solidified at that point. So she offered him a bowl, and he did not know how to eat Jello. He tried to drink it from the bowl, and she actually had to get a spoon, or take the spoon and show him how to eat it. And there was another case where people had they had let this case is a little bit more involved, but the son, married son, and his wife. The son his father was a UFO investigator, and had a visit a couple of nights before by a singular man in black, and then a couple of days later, his son was approached by this couple at a McDonald's, who this couple said that they wanted to come over to his house to talk about his father's experience. Now, again, this guy didn't know these people from Adam, and yet he said, "Sure, follow me," and got into his car, and they followed him in his car to their house and let them in, complete strangers. But his wife gave them cold bottles of Coke, and they did not know how to drink from those bottles. Now, how many people do you know don't know how to drink from a bottle?
Just in general, like any type of fluid, I don't feel like there's any other option on like how to. It's either a straw or a
Yep,
bottle. It's one of the
yep,
two.
yep. The other odd thing they said was that these people, that they walked funny. They said that they walked like their legs weren't attached to their torsos right. Both of them. They said that their legs appeared to be attached to the sides of their hips rather than coming down like a normal, normal, which made them walk. They said like marionettes, almost kind of like this weird side to side movement. And as this weird couple sat on the couch talking to this man and his wife, the male was fondling his companion's breasts and asking the people of the house if he was doing it right. And again,
Like trying to take like a basic human thing and just see if it kind of works for him almost.
I
Like,
don't.
this is something a
Yeah,
human would
yeah,
do.
exactly. Almost. It was just a very weird thing. And again, this was in the early 70s. So, I mean, I don't, I mean, you still, you still wouldn't go and visit strangers, even today, and start feeling up your companion and asking the people, "House, is this right? Am I doing it right?" So,
I mean, looking at society and the way it used to be back then, where like porno theaters were like a normal thing, like who knows what it could have saw and associated with like normal human
yeah,
reaction or interaction.
yeah, but that's see, there's all kinds of stories like that with people interacting with these what appear to be human looking things, but don't seem to understand just the normal social interactions, or even how to eat or drink or things that we take for granted. And these are the aspects of these encounters that really stand out um, to these people who have encountered these things, and which then has left them that with the distinct impression that they weren't dealing with humans. These things may look human and to a certain extent act human, but there's something not right. There's something going on that leaves these people with the impression that they were dealing with something completely different.
That almost makes you kind of wonder. It connects in with like the the black-eyed children. It makes you wonder if there's again multiple races or multiple be entities, whatever you want to call it, that are involved in this weird interaction with humans. And maybe one of them is better at it, where they have, it's not quite there where it needs to be yet, enough that people have that uncanny valley feeling and know that something's wrong. Where you have like the Men in Black, and then maybe there's other races that are trying to develop this type of interactive technology for themselves. And that's where you have things like the black-eyed children, where they're still kind of prototyping it and trying to figure it out for themselves, because not all these races may want to give up their secrets to other ones on how to create these different types of like biological vessels in order to interact with humans. So again, maybe like the black-eyed children, in the way that they're so aggressive, maybe it's like a predecessor to another race trying to find another way to interact with humans, but that just isn't there yet enough to even get in the door.
Well, it's cases like that, the black-eyed children, and the the strangers coming to your door, that really, I mean, it makes this subject rather difficult to 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 talk about. And I mean, not difficult to talk about that, I don't, you don't want to talk about it, but just it's difficult to pin it down. Be
It's all
Yeah, well,
speculation.
but I mean, it's speculation on what's going on. It's not speculation that people are having these encounters. All right, and so I mean, in our book, Mimics the Others Among Us, we're attempting to bring all of these kind of like diverse situations under one umbrella, even though that more than likely you're dealing with, like you said, maybe all kinds of different things with a maybe superficial similarities. The superficial similarities being they look human but they're not. And the black-eyed kids is it's that's a very interesting thing, because it really it it also harkens back to stories that we've run across that are hundreds of years old. I mean, it's the black-eyed kids are not new. It's not a new thing, and their whole the way that they operate, knocking on your door and asking to come inside. We need to come inside. Can we use your phone to call our mom? It's cold. We're lost. But they always have to ask to come inside. And that harks right back to the old like vampire and fairy legends, where none of these things could come into your house unless they were invited in, or at least they would stand outside your window at night and call your name, and if you answered, that would be enough to allow them to come inside. But the black-eyed kids would always insist that we can't come inside unless you invite us in. And again, the old vampire stories. The vampires could not come inside your house unless you gave them permission to come inside. So, the Chinese would call these things hungry ghosts, ghosts of the dead that were still looking for sustenance, blood or life energy or what have you. And it's almost like the black-eyed kids are playing that very same role, the very same following the very same rules, that have been established for thousands and thousands of years. And and like a lot of these other encounters, like with the Men in Black or the others that come knocking on your door, the black-eyed kids, even before their eyes are noticed, people will report that they just get an uneasy feeling around these kids, that there's something not right with these kids. One person actually said that they had the feeling right away that they were in the presence of predators and that they could be eaten alive at any moment if they let their guard down. Now, that's really an interesting statement from somebody who is, there's little kids at your doorstep, cold and lost possibly and hungry, and yet they're left with the feeling that they're in the presence of something that's going to kill them.
I mean, that seems like it's kind of ideal though for like an advanced predator, is that you completely lower the guard down so that you don't even have to worry about anybody necessarily defending, because they just would like assuming that you're a weak kid, not realizing that, you're something way more than them. It's like if their own form of like camouflage to a certain
Mhm.
extent.
Yeah, and of course, the stories that we get about the black-eyed kids are from the people who haven't let them in, and it makes you wonder: are there cases where people did, and you know they're a statistic the next day? You know,
I've heard one story and it was off of Reddit. So again, it's kind of one of
uh,
those things that you could kind of throw out of the window, or there may be some truth to it, but it's always worth at least kind of entertaining the possibility. But the one that I had read that was talking about somebody that let a black-eyed children in, they said that they got really violent and that they took off into like a bedroom and locked themselves
mm,
into a bedroom, and then they stopped hearing noise, and when they went back out,
they're
they were just
gone.
gone. And I'm sure that there's probably some more of these stories if you look out on the internet, but at least the one that I read, that's, I mean, weirdly enough, seems kind of fitting to what they would do. Like they're almost just kind of trying to see what they can do versus actually trying to physically like do something. Or, maybe there's some weirdness to it too, where if there's some kind of weird universal rule about like letting somebody in, maybe if there's another closed door within that, maybe there's like a second set of permission that's needed to go into that. So at that point, they're kind of just like, all right, whatever.
The only case that I ever heard where they actually let them in, um, and this was a situation that they let them in before they actually saw their eyes, but they let them at least into the front hallway, from the front door. But their cats freaked out so much to the point that they thought that the cats were actually going to, like, tear down the kitchen door, trying to get away from these children. But so they then, like, shush, get out to the kids, sent them out again, and then the kids just mysteriously disappeared. I mean, they were in a rural area to begin with. All right. So when they pushed the kids back out onto the front porch, then when they checked almost immediately, they were gone. I mean, and, no kids on the road. They looked around the house, nothing there. Like, over the next couple of days, the cats got sick. Both the cats died. Eventually, the husband developed heart problems and passed away rather quickly after this incident himself, within a matter of a few months. So,
I mean, maybe these things already let themselves in, but they're not in a physical way. They're in a interdimensional or like a spiritual, whatever you want to call it. Like they become attached to you in a different way where they don't need to physically be like there to instill whatever they're trying to do. Like if there's some type of like energy vampire or something like that. But I mean, at least between the story that you had and the story that I had, maybe there is a common thread between them, that it seems that they just will randomly disappear whenever, the trouble
mm.
starts happening. You push them out the door, you go and hide yourself, and then they just poof,
Well, it's the
disappear.
same thing with these Men in Black encounters, or like the stories that I told you about the bizarre strangers. Is that a lot of times after these people leave, they vanish almost immediately and rather inexplicably. A couple times, like a car, a big black car would drive up and pick them up and drive away. Other times they'll just they'll be seen like walking the sidewalk in front of the house, away from the house, only then to just vanish completely. um there's was an interesting story that Sean Castile had in one of his chapters in our book Mimics, about a gentleman by the name of Bruce Lee, not the Bruce Lee, but there's just the same name. And he worked for the same publishing company that was distributing Whitley Strieber's first book, Communion. And him and his wife, Bruce Lee and his wife, had gone to a Manhattan bookstore to check out the display that this bookstore had put up for Communion. And while they were there, he noticed this rather odd looking couple come into the store. He said they were rather short, and they were dressed in and it was rather cold outside. I think it was like November or something like that, but these people were wearing like clothes that were very wrapped up, like scarves around them, hats. The woman had they both had big sunglasses on, and these people went right up to this display and they picked up one of Whitley's books, and they were leafing through it, making comments to each other that Mr. Lee could hear. They were saying things like, oh well, he got that right, and he was like, oh wow, that's just completely wrong. And so he was curious what mistakes may be in the book. So he went up to them and he asked, excuse me, I work for the publishing company. What are you finding right or wrong about this book? And he said that the woman looked up at him because she was short, and he could see that her skin was extremely white, and that her chin came down to like an almost a point, and that through her sunglasses he could see that her eyes were huge and somewhat almond shaped. But he said that when she looked at him, he said that he felt like that he was in the presence of a dog that was getting ready to bite him. And she didn't say anything to him, but he just felt like this wave of hostility just overtake him, to the point where he was just like, oh, never mind, and just backed away. But it left enough of an impression on him that he made comments to Whitley, and then Whitley and several other people wrote about this. So I mean, and this this is very similar to other types of encounters with kind of like odd looking people on the streets that are using like hats and scarves and sunglasses to seemingly to disguise maybe not quite human looking characteristics, usually with the like the chin and the eyes. Skin is usually described as being extremely pale, either extremely pale, or there's also people who have especially like with the Men in Black, the kind of like the dark, almost olive colored type of skin. But again, we have that same kind of characteristic of people feeling off, that they're in danger, or they're in the presence of something that just absolutely hates them. Now, whether or not these things actually, do hate people, and people are picking up on that hostility, or if there's some kind of mind manipulation that has taken place, that as almost like as a form of protection or self-defense, that this is a projection being put into their mind that I'm dangerous, I'm going to bite, type of situation. I don't know, but it's a very similar characteristic that we see all across the board with interactions with these things.
It almost makes you wonder too if, you look at them having advanced technology where they may not, I mean, they could definitely have like some type of telepathic abilities, but if you aren't on the side that necessarily believes in that and you kind of fall into like the advanced technology aspect of it, I mean, they could even have some type of like transmitter or something in their pocket that gives off like a certain frequency. And when they get into that situation where they're like figured out, they could essentially like hit this button in their pocket and it will give off this like
Mhm.
energy that's like that get away from me energy. It may not be as like woo woo as people think it is. It could literally just be like a frequency that it's inaudible to you that you're hearing in your pocket that's able to manipulate the way that your mind's working and thinking.
Well, and there's the other aspect, and it's funny because when we were putting this book together originally, I mean, it was basically finished, and I was on one of our chapter writers, a guy by the name of Hercules Invictus. He had a podcast, and I was on his show, and we were talking about something completely different, but somehow it kind of the conversation got onto the book that we were discussing. And it occurred to me in this conversation that there could be a sense of smell going on here. And as I started talking about it, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to research this and then add it into the book. So I actually went back to the conclusion chapter. And if anybody goes out and buys this book, please buy this book, by the way. You'll see where I dropped it in, because it was like, this, I think this, this could be an important point where maybe at least one of the aspects at play with people when they encounter these things and have these feelings about them, that it could be coming from a sense of smell, that these things don't smell right. All right. They don't smell human. Now, despite what you read, humans have pretty good noses. All right. They're not as good as the dog or anything like that, but it's still pretty good. And
We can't smell far, but I feel like we have more cue notes for stuff that's right in front of our face. So we can smell more stuff than a lot of things can on the planet, as long as it's not like a distance away. That's where most animals have the
right,
benefit that
right,
we don't.
exactly. But the one thing that we can distinguish, though, is that we can distinguish another human from an animal. From an
Yeah, I'd
animal.
say that's that uncanny
Yes.
valley thing too. We just always have this back instilled gut intuition feeling of what is human and what
Right.
isn't human.
Right.
Like even somebody that's psychopathic, like you have this thing in your head where you're able to tell that they're not quite the same kind of
Right.
human as you.
So if these things have a different smell, not enough to be that obvious, even though there are cases that I have in the book where these things do have a smell that is very obvious and very different. So much so that people, will comment about it later. But in a lot of these other cases where people just suddenly are engulfed with this feelings of fear or dread that they can't, a terror that they can't understand, it may be coming from an unconscious level, because we are smelling these things and recognize that even though they look human and are acting human, they don't smell human. And so that sets off that whole um, I can't think of what's the word I'm trying to think of. Not, unconscious, but no, I can't think of the words. Same thing that happens, like when you're in the doctor's office and you cross your leg and he hits your leg, and like an involuntary response. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's this involuntary response that causes the hair on the back of your neck to raise up. You get the goosebumps and everything, but not in a pleasant way. And I base a lot of this also on a short story that I read years ago. It was a science fiction written by a science fiction author, and it was called Man of Steel, Woman of Tissue. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it was just a whole kind of like a kind of a somewhat humorous essay on why Superman would never be able to interact and breed with humans. All right. Mainly because if he has all these superpowers and everything like that, if he were to actually get together with Lois Lane, his involuntary responses while he would be making love to her, he'd tear her up. he'd,
That's what I
yeah,
was
yeah,
getting at too.
he'd crush her. But the other thing is that he said that he wrote about is that because Superman is not human, he may look human, but he's not. He's an alien from Krypton. People wouldn't smell right to him. It would be like us trying to find, say, like a gorilla or a chimpanzee pleasant to smell. And these are those are something that's really close to our species. So if we are dealing with things that are so different from us, even though they look like us, that they don't smell right, then yeah, that's going to raise an involuntary response within us that we don't understand why we're feeling that way. We just know that we are. And once again, though, see, you brought up the uncanny valley. And that's a situation that scientists have discovered when they're working on trying to develop robots that look human. And the closer they found that these robots that they were making looked human, the more uneasy feelings that they generated in people. And that's why instead of making these robots try to look as completely human as possible, they actually are starting to give them more, say, like anime types of looks to them. The big cartoony eyes and shapes like that. People are more comfortable with something like an automation that looks like that rather than something that looks so close to us that it hits that uncanny valley. There are some cartoons that are the same way. The Polar Express.
hmm Their eyes are so dead in that it freaks you out, but you don't quite know why. But if you really start paying attention, it's because the eyes are
Exactly.
dead.
Exactly. There's something not right. And it's funny because I've had some people tell me that the same thing, people who have had encounters, with the others, and they'll say, I got the same feeling years later when I watched the Polar Express. There was another one that the same company made, Mars Needs Moms.
Yep.
They
Yeah.
use that same kind of animation technique that just it just made people feel creepy when they're watching them. And so that's, they said they got the same feeling after and it was years later after they had their interactions with the others that then they saw these cartoons. You're like, I got that same kind of feeling watching these cartoons as I did when these things were sitting, in my living room talking to me. So I mean, just imagine, the characters from these cartoons actually coming into your house. You don't like to watch them on the movie screen. How you think you're going to feel if they are actually sitting on your couch trying to drink your Jello?
So, I was gonna ask, from your research, has anybody kind of given you a description of what the smell is? Because assumably it's something that's like unearthly, but there would have some type of like related smell to it on Earth. Like if you kind of have an idea of like what the smell might kind of be, or even in
Well,
certain scenarios.
in the cases where people have actually, reported a smell, and it's again, it can be different with each case. Um, One person described it as smelling like formaldehyde, and he had worked, I guess, at one point in a funeral home and knew and was very familiar with how those chemicals smelled. And this was a bartender, that had an experience where this very bizarre couple came into his bar. He was the only one there. It was at closing time, and they wanted a drink, and he said, "Well, I'm closing, but I'll fix you a drink, but you're going to have to leave soon." But they got the drinks, but never drank them. But he said that the female especially had this smell of formaldehyde to her. And another case, the person reported that the people smelt like dirt, like freshly dug dirt.
Now I'm kind of wondering, we're talking about the whole biological drone thing. What if they're able to reanimate
Yeah.
dead bodies? Because formaldehyde sounds like you're taking something from a funeral home, or even if they're doing like, the missing 411 thing, you're going to have to preserve the body somehow before you go to use it. And then even the dirt smell, they could literally be taking freshly buried bodies and reanimating it as a biological drone, because essentially what would be better to be able to do that with, because then you wouldn't have to essentially build the actual body. You'd already have the body made. It's just a matter of finding a way to animate it.
Don't think that I haven't speculated along those lines because
As soon as you said
yeah,
dirt, it just clicked right in my. I already heard it with
yeah.
formaldehyde, but that dirt just put the nail in the
Well,
coffin.
and yeah, no pun
No pun
intended, right?
intended.
Oh no, I mean, yeah, don't think that I haven't thought along those same lines as well, because you look at a lot of these cases, with these things, and so many of the reports are these especially the skin is extremely pale to the point of being white. Uh,
Even the olive color could be that kind of starts to decay if it's like
right,
that bluish green.
right, and just the kind of a lot of times that kind of shambling type of way that they walk, uh, um, and it's like we pointed out before, the dialogues a lot of times are very like robotic, or like they were talking from a script. Uh, uh, that there didn't seem to be any kind of back and forth response from these things. They would talk to the people, and then if they got a response that was outside of, I guess, what was to be expected, it almost would like throw them for a loop for a moment, and then they would like go and repeat the same thing over again, and then go on to the next line of dialogue. Um,
Kind of sounds like interacting with like
yeah,
artificial intelligence
oh yeah,
almost.
very much so. You know, uh, Timothy Green Beckley told me a story of he was harassed for a while by this guy that had this kind of unique ability to be able to track Beckley down. And this was, like pre-internet days, but this guy would show up a lot of times in locations that Beckley was, that Tim could never quite figure out how he knew where he was. He actually, this guy actually managed to track down um, where Beckley used to live when he was a kid, and like his family home that nobody else was supposed would know about, where this was in New Jersey. Yet this guy managed to show up there, and in fact, Tim found out his name and actually talked to this guy's mother, who told him that he he was a normal guy most of the time, but then he would just suddenly, and I can't remember what the words were that she used, but Beckley said that it was like he was possessed. All right, that he would be normal, and then all of a sudden he would be possessed by something else that he would then, like call Beckley up on the phone and just repeat these like rambling, almost like pre-programmed messages to him. And when he would accost Tim on the street, it was kind of like the same thing. He would just say these things to Tim over and over and over again, and then go away. And and Tim just always said, he goes, I just always felt like that at the time that this guy was talking to me, that he was dead and that something else was talking through him. Um, so it's very similar to a lot of these other cases, like you said, like almost like they have been possessed by another intelligence, or even like an AI. And that's something I bring out in the book as well. I mean, we're at the very beginning stages of the whole AI revolution. I mean, in 50, 100 years from now, will we be at the point where AI will be able to actually have a physical form and to interact with people physically? And if that's the case, if we're able to do that, could there be other intelligences that are doing the same thing? That for whatever reason, and that's the odd thing about all of these, encounters and interactions that we've been talking about, that there a lot of times there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason, other than, like at times some of these people will have, say, like a UFO experience, or some kind of paranormal experience that'll act like a catalyst to set these things off. But again, it's almost like you have got an AI intelligence that has the ability to manipulate our reality, to create a physical form, maybe briefly, interact with us, and then either return the body to the grave or dissolve, go back to, go back to its energy state, or whatever, with the actual intelligence behind it being someplace else, and that great unknowable that we had talked about earlier.
I mean, either one, if you're looking at it from like a possible more like woo woo perspective, it could be a matter of they're able to basically like shift their consciousness into something else and be able to temporarily animate it through that. Or if you're going into a possible like more advanced technology standpoint, I mean, we already have like, what are they called? The micro
Mhm.
bots and stuff like that. I mean, they could assumably be the same thing that they could use for these things, or they have some type of advanced technology where it's able to just reanimate it temporarily, and you never notice that it goes away because the bots could just
Hmm.
blow up after, or just disintegrate, or just kind of incorporate themselves into part of the body, because who knows, our perspective of looking at things, we're looking at things from like a technological standpoint of it being like metal and electrics and things like that. But that doesn't mean that other races and other beings that are way more advanced than us are using that same type of thing. They could be using something that's like nanobots, but completely biological, where it could animate a body and stay in the body. And we have no idea of what that could be, or we may not even notice that it's in the body, and it could be all over it. And we could have evidence of these nano, you know, biological bots everywhere, but again, we're just not advanced enough to recognize it or even know that it's
Oh
something
yeah,
there.
exactly. So I mean, it's, you made that difference, that the difference between, woo woo or an advanced technology. What's the difference? you know uh an advanced technology to the point with us is going to look like woo woo. That's what Arthur C. Clarke
Mhm.
said. What was it? An advanced science is going to be to us indistinguishable from magic. So yeah, I mean, one or the other, I don't think it really makes any kind of difference. uh the only thing is that we are dealing with something unknown that is able to either look like us either it was born that way and and looks like us, because that's the way it looks, or it's able to manipulate itself to look like us, or manipulate our perceptions so that we see it as looking like us. But the ultimate fact is that it is not us, and we're able to at least unconsciously perceive that we're not dealing with a human, that we're dealing with something else.
Mm-hmm. So, you kind of been dancing around it a little bit, of course, and of course, we want to talk about your new book a little bit. We're running on about 2.5 hours or so now, and I know we've kind of touched base on a couple of the different concepts you've talked about in your new book. But for anybody that's enjoyed the conversation and they're really interested in this new book, why don't you kind of give them an idea of like what exactly they're going to find in the book, and just I guess kind of like a rough overline of what
Sure.
exactly
Well,
your new
the
book
book is
is.
called Mimics: The Others Among Us, and the authors are myself, Sean Castile, and then we have a lot of contributing authors as well. And all of us were writers for the late Timothy Green Beckley. So I wanted to get all of us back together to continue writing books on the things that we always loved writing about, with Tim Beckley. And the main thesis of this book is like I said, this book deals with this whole humanoid entity aspect that we have seen throughout the centuries, that interacts with mankind to various degrees, in various shapes and forms, depending on when these interactions take place in history or modern times, cultural, social aspects. They'll go by the various names and descriptions based on that time period. You go back into the ancient past, and they presented themselves as like deities or angels or uh, uh, fairies and the good people. And when I say fairies, I don't mean like the modern conceptions of fairies, like Tinkerbell with the little tiny glowing things with wings and things like that. No, I mean the old beliefs in fairies had them. Sometimes they would be shorter, like what we would think of as like elves or gnomes, but most of the time these things were thought of as being practically indistinguishable from humans. Same size as humans. They had their own societies, like underground or off in the woods, and they interacted with people much like the say like the alleged extraterrestrials from UFOs interact with us today. So, and of course, the UFO aspect of the phenomena is kind of like the flavor of the month. I mean, people don't really believe anymore in angels or fairies, but the idea of extraterrestrials from other planets, well, that could be a possibility. And the thing about these entities is that they are all too willing to take on whatever face we expect them to be. So right now, again, we think of the possibility of extraterrestrials visiting us, and they tend to present themselves along those lines. You still have societies that believe in other types of supernatural or elemental types of creatures, and they'll present themselves along those lines as well. So, the main idea of the book is to try to collect all of these different types of stories from around the world, from throughout history, and bring them all together um, to raise the reader's awareness of how ubiquitous this phenomena is and how it's really kind of been ignored, I think. That just the this whole idea of human looking supernatural, extraterrestrial, what have you, entities that have interacted with people throughout history. That's pretty much the the synopsis of the book. And we include, we also include things like cryptid creatures, like the black-eyed kids or the Slender Man or Bigfoot or Wild Man, because I mean they have humanoid human shapes to them. But we kind of like to have concentrated more on the beings where there is an actual one-on-one interactions with these things, rather than I was driving my car and I saw this this thing run across the road. We've got stories like that, but it's the actual interactions, intellectual interactions, talking interactions with these things that I think is really fascinating. And we try to get an understanding and maybe some explanations, but again, it's speculative on what we're exactly dealing with, because we don't know. These Again, these things tend to tell us what we want to hear, rather than maybe what the truth is. Maybe there is no truth. Maybe we are hearing the truth by hearing what we want to hear. But the main aspect is that we want people to become aware of just how ubiquitous the human shape is with these types of entities.
If I know my listeners, I definitely know that this book that you just made is going to be right up their alley, and I think that it's going to spark a lot of their interest, and a lot of them are going to be drawn towards it. So, that being said, of course, where can they come
Sure.
and find
Well,
your book at?
probably the easiest way would be to go to Amazon.com. Just type in my name, Tim R. Swartz, or the title mimics the others among us, and you'll be able to find it both as a print and ebook. We're working to make it available on physical bookstores, but that's a little bit more difficult. There's more hoops to jump through for something like that. But for your immediate gratification, I would recommend going to Amazon.com to get it. And you can also find links on our website at conspiracyjournal.com.
And if anybody was trying to find you in order to, possibly share some encounters with you, keep tabs on your kind of work, where can they come
Sure.
and find you at?
Again, the easiest way would be to go to conspiracyjournal.com. You'll find links there that you can send emails and communicate with us that way. Not only myself, but Sean Castile and our other authors like Scott Corrales, Nigel Watson, Chris Holly. Gene Steinberg. We got Paul Eno, Lon Strickler. We got I was so happy. We got some just excellent researchers and writers for this book, because like yourself and hopefully your listeners, when I presented them with my initial idea for this, everybody was just like, oh my gosh, that's just such a fascinating idea.
Mm-hmm.
And like me, once you become aware of these types of encounters, you'll start to see them all over the place. You go to, say, like a favorite website. A good example would be Lon Strickler's Phantom and Monsters websites. You'll find just all kinds of fascinating encounters with these human-looking creatures that that nobody has really thought about bringing them all together and trying to see, is there a connection? There has to be a connection, and that's what we're looking for.
Say for me in particular, I've been on this one for a really long time, where I've been wondering if a lot of these things, like I mentioned to you earlier in the show, are all the same thing. So as far as I go, all you had to do was you shot me a message and said mimics Among Us, and you already had me sold at the title. I already knew what it was getting at, and I knew it was right up my alley on something that I've been getting into. And same with my listeners, at least hearing me rant about it for a while between this show and Bizarre Encounters.
Well, and of course, you know, after the book was written and published, then I start running across even more stories that I'm just like, oh my god, this would have been such a perfect story for the book. So you know, now it's just like, well, you know, start collecting more. Maybe we can come up with you know, enough good stories to write a second book. I mean, there's uh,
Mimics
yeah,
still
yeah.
among
Well,
us.
I mean, there was this one I ran across just the other day, and this was from a Swedish UFO magazine from the 70s that this woman had written a letter to it, and they published it. And she had like a little house out in the country in Sweden, and she had gotten up early one morning to watch the sunrise, went out in the woods, and she was looking for um, lingonberries, which you know is a kind of a cranberry type of berry that grows in that area. And she all of a sudden she heard children's voices, you know, laughing, and she turned around, and there were a couple of, she said, looked to be about maybe 12, 13-year-old girls sitting on a log that she had just passed by. And you know, there hadn't been anybody there previously, and she said these little girls were sitting there eating what looked to her to be like white buns. And so she apologized to him. She goes, "Oh, I'm sorry. I almost stepped on you. I didn't even see you there." And they told her, they said, "Oh, well, don't worry about it. We saw you coming, and there wouldn't have been any way you would have run into us unless we wouldn't have let you." And so she said that these little girls were very smart, and more, a lot more mature than it seemed like they should be for their age, almost precocious, she said. And at one point one of the girls stood up and said, "You know, I feel like lingonberries." And she said the girl kind of like went like that with her hand, and the forest floor was then covered in lingonberries. And so after that, they were like, "Well, we have to go now. So we'll see you later. Goodbye." And the woman said, "Okay, goodbye." And then the little girls looked at each other and they laughed and they said, "Can you," and they were saying this to each other. They said, "Can you imagine us running into and talking to an actual human in these woods? Who would have thought it?" And then they just disappeared. I mean, that is a quintessential story, you know, for the mimics. The only difference is that this woman never felt threatened by these little girls. But just that statement from them saying, to think that we saw a human, and they were just so happy about it. It's just like, wow, that's a great story.
They're on the other side, and they're trying to figure out us just as much as we're trying to figure them out.
Could very well be. Could very well be. It sounds like it though. You know, it's just you know, it's just it's one of these mysteries that you'll find throughout this book. So, you know, I mean, I hope your listeners get themselves a copy and enjoy it as much as all of us enjoyed researching and writing it.
So I've definitely enjoyed at least the little bit that I've gotten to read so far since I just got it not too long ago. But I'm already far blown into it, and I'm planning on reading it all the way to the back
Well,
cover.
and
So
there's a lot of information in this book. And I mean, you know, the money that you spend on it is not that expensive. You'll definitely get your money's worth out of it.
and I always like to leave the show, of course, on a high note. So if there's any words of wisdom that you could bestow on the
Oh my
listeners,
gosh.
what would it be?
I think it was the same situation as last time, where I'm just like, I have no idea what kind of words you know, of wisdom. You know, I suppose my words of wisdom would be, when it comes to all of this stuff, is don't believe any of it. I don't believe in it. I don't believe in any of this stuff. I find it interesting. I love to get these stories, but I am not going to commit myself to a belief system on any of this. And I recommend the same thing um, with your listeners as well, because as soon as you set yourself into a belief system, then you close your mind to any new information that comes on down the line. And the thing is, with all of these mysteries that we love talking about, is that new information is always coming down, and so you have to keep your mind open to this new information, new facts, and don't let yourself become convinced on one specific aspect. It's like the UFO phenomena. Don't go and, just convince yourself that it's all extraterrestrials and nothing else, because if anything new comes down the line, you're going to have a difficult time accepting that, because you've got your mindset already. So keep your minds open, keep your eyes open. Don't believe in anything, but enjoy the information as it comes down to you.
That was actually beautiful words of wisdom, because I kind of live up to the same thing, where it's like, don't hold everything to
Yes.
be hard fact, but of course, always entertain any possibility, because you never know what possibility could actually be the correct possibility. And you'll never get there unless you at least kind of theorize, bounce around in your head, and at least kind of have
Absolutely.
some fun with it. So it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Always is, of course. Like we're mentioning in the beginning of the show, it's always one of those things where, we're running about 2 hours and 40 minutes now, and we could still keep talking for another couple hours. So it just leaves the doorway open for you to hopefully come back on the show sooner than later,
Oh,
preferably.
my pleasure. Anytime you want me on, just ask me, because I love talking with you, and I really hope that your listeners enjoy this as well, and get something from it. I mean, I hope it opens their minds, to the possibilities of what a beautiful, wondrous universe that we live in.
I'm going to hit record right here.